anecdotally, we hear an awful lot these days about young people and the impact on their mental health that COVID and other factors have had. You've not had the full breadth of education that you might have had because of those effects. I mean, are any of you and your friends struggling a little bit at the moment?
I think definitely over exam period, and like you say, coming from COVID and stuff like that, being in lockdown, trying to revise for my GCSEs in 2021, and just being at home, it was really difficult because I couldn't communicate with my friends properly. I do feel quite lucky that we live in this day and age where social media and we can communicate quite well, but it's not the same, is it, being in person? And definitely going into A levels, I feel like we didn't have as good as skills as we would have had, if that makes sense, because obviously we hadn't seen people for 2 years, and then we're all trying to make new friends in 2022 starting year 12. So that was definitely quite difficult, and I have seen people have really bad mental health issues because of being at home all the time, especially when you're a teenager and you're going through puberty and all your hormones are changing. You're bound to feel a bit, have a bit of anxiety about everything changing, and having that on top of it, and then going into a huge change like A levels, it all mounts up, and it's not been a very good experience, and I don't feel like they've taken that into account this year.
And yeah, and all power to you for this. And as mentioned before, you're the first in the family to go. Your dad had a go at university, but not for
Hmm.
very long. Despite all of that, you've been confident enough. You've gone out there. You've made the applications. You've picked your universities, and you are sitting at home, hoping that it all goes well. I mean, does the financial side of things, does that not perhaps concern you a little bit?
The financial side is one of my biggest worries, especially with the cost of living crisis. And the biggest thing is as well, when I applied to university, the cost of accommodation was different to what it is now. So I've set in stone where I want to go, and then they've increased the prices. So for accommodation, it's really expensive now. They've put the prices up so much, not just at Durham, but at every single university. So when I was applying, it wasn't that high, and with inflation being so high over, because you apply, don't you, about a year before, something like that, and inflation was totally different a year ago to what it is now. So accommodation has accounted for that, and things like the cost of food. I didn't know the cost of food was going to be this high a year ago. So now I'm going into university in September with the worry of, am I going to have enough to really survive? And with my parents and things trying to help me in September, they're worried as well because we just don't know how much it's going to cost, because it could go up more and more.
I have to admit, I've got a special degree of sympathy for those who are going through the education system at the moment. Why is it that we are now describing this current cohort of A-level students as the unluckiest?
So this current cohort that are getting their A-level and other results across Britain this morning have been unlucky for a number of reasons. They've kind of faced a sort of perfect storm in many ways. So, of course, they suffered like many young people during the pandemic. They didn't go to school for a long time during that time. Wouldn't have done their GCSEs or equivalents at age 16. So this is the first time they've taken major, examinations. And many of them will have suffered learning loss during that time. Of course, we've also had this cost of living crisis, which has affected a lot of children and young people across the country. But also importantly, this cohort is the first in which we're coming back down to the tougher grade boundaries, if you like, the pre-pandemic grade. So there'll be fewer A's and A stars than previously. And on top of all this, and I hate to depress everyone on this, is it's tougher because there are more 18-year-olds now in the population. So, we have demographic booms and troughs over the years, and we're currently in a boom. That means there's more 18-year-olds, but there aren't more places. There aren't more university places. And universities, particularly at the moment, are having to think about international students as well as home students because of the sort of funding requirements to balance the books, if you like. So it just means it's going to be very competitive this year. So for a whole host of reasons, this is a tough admissions round for this generation.
Well, let's try and pick apart the factors that you were mentioning there. And we'll start with COVID. And look, I'm a father myself, but my boy is 7 years old. So the problems that we had were more to do with socialisation rather than studying to get into university. But I suppose that no matter the age that you are at, there will be plenty of kids who have struggled, not just academically, but with their mental health as a result of COVID.
Absolutely. So, a lot of my studies look at the learning loss that have been suffered by those pupils, actually not just low income, but middle income backgrounds as well. So there's those children have suffered academically, but also there's been a real issue, a sort of tsunami almost of mental health issues. And that's as important, by the way, as the academic issues. And many young people have missed out on that socialization. So if you're sort of 15, 16, 17, these are the years where you start to become more independent. You make friends, and as much of your development is about that socialization as it is interaction in the classroom. So, for example, one of the things that we're finding this year is that a lot of young people, including my daughter, actually, funny enough, are deferring entry into university. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of young people do that is they just want a break, and who can blame them in many ways, and maybe, actually live a little before going to do that degree course. So I think that's a reflection of what you say.
When you say that it's not just the richest, it's also the middle classes that are being affected by it, that suggests to me that the overwhelming majority of students are going to have been negatively impacted by what is going on. And if we take the normalisation of A-level results, I mean, that could have a really detrimental effect on huge numbers of kids. Just explain exactly how that process that the Minister, Nick Gibb, has been talking about to add weight and credibility to qualifications, how that is going to affect people.
So, basically, in the last couple of years, for various reasons, we have been allocating a higher proportion of A grades, of B grades at the top of the grades distribution. But at some point, the government was faced with this dilemma of when do you bring it back down to the grade distributions that we were experiencing before the pandemic, okay? And so last year, it was a sort of halfway house in terms of bringing back down these grade boundaries. This year, it will be broadly the same as the pre-pandemic years. So that just means that a lot of young people will not are less likely to get those A's and B's that they need for those, very highly selective sort of degree places. The other issue I think we're faced this year is that children get predicted a grade, okay, by their teachers. And then on results day, we find out whether they actually achieved those predicted grades. If you don't, then it actually opens you up a whole new pathway, which we call clearing, which is basically what are the alternative options, given that you might not have met the degree offer that the degree you applied for. And it makes it quite complicated. I have advocated for what we call a post-qualifications admission system, which basically means you apply with your grades, right? But we're not in that place at the moment. The problem for this year's cohort is that teachers didn't have proper GCSE results to base those predictions on. So there are many people, many experts in the sector are worried that those predictions might not be as robust. There's always uncertainty in those predictions, but there could be more this year than previous years. And what I try to do, and in my own little way, trying to advise and help some young people, is not to rush into those decisions as well. Because remember, certainly in England, you're paying a lot of money for these degrees now, fees of £9,000 above, living costs. These are life-defining decisions. And I do think that we force young people in the current system to make decisions very quickly. And if you don't have all the advice for how to navigate the university system, I think it's very difficult.